Selina Robinson was a dedicated New Democrat, a woman who was elected more than a decade ago, who served under 2 different premiers and 4 different cabinet posts, and then was summarily thrown out of the party that she had been part of for so long over comments that shouldn't have caused any criticism or concern at all. Hello, I'm Brian Lilley, and this is the Full Comment Podcast. And today we're going to look at the issue of antisemitism in the NDP, a party that was at one time very much a home for Jewish Canadians, but at this point is somewhere that most of them don't feel at home. Selina Robinson joins us from Coquitlam. Selina, thanks for the time today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's walk through what exactly happened with you. End of January, you're doing a panel discussion and you make a comment. What did you say that became the launch pad for an all-out assault on you?
Well, I was trying to represent the West and trying to represent a female voice and trying to represent a New Democrat voice on a panel that was all male, all East Coast, as we say here on the West Coast. And there was certainly no New Democrat on the panel. We were talking about
who was hosting the panel?
It was B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith was hosting the panel. And we were talking about anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism since October 7th. And in my little bit that I had, I was the last speaker, and so really had to rush through my comments. Reflecting on the data that's been coming out that 18 to 34-year-olds here in Canada are not familiar with the Holocaust, are not familiar with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. They don't have, solid understanding of how things transpired. They don't have the history knowledge. And I was talking about that people don't understand that, and they didn't understand that the land of Israel, and I was speaking directly about the land, and I said, and it became a meme, is that it was a crappy piece of land, and really focusing on, yes, there were several 100,000 people living there, but there were no minerals, there's no gas, there's no oil, no water, it was
not even really strong agriculture at the time.
No strong agriculture. There was subsistence farming for sure. There was some farming. I'm not saying that there was nothing, but really it wasn't. It didn't have a strong economy on those lands itself, and frankly, my reading and my understanding of history is that the Ottomans were poor land stewards, and there was a lot of swampland and a lot of desert, and that recording was grabbed by folks who are frankly anti-Israel, and used that and promoted that as somehow me suggesting that Muslims, and Palestinian Muslims in particular who were living there, were somehow bad people in some way, or that there was nobody living there. That was the other focus that people had. And that's not at all what I intended. I recognize that people were hurt by my comments. It wasn't I intended. And it was the Ottomans that were.
But at their core, there is nothing inaccurate about your comment. If you know the mildest bit of history of the region, you know that to be true. And I was in Israel a couple of months ago, down in areas around in the Gaza envelope, as they call it, visiting some of the kibbutzes that were attacked. Mm-hmm. And there's wonderful farming now, and then you look across past the fence, and there's no farming, there's no agriculture, and the land is not as prosperous. There is something to what happened when Israel went in and said, we need to make this land productive. And they did. It's the same parcel of land. It's the same area. They just did something different. And people have talked about that for generations. I learned about it in school. So there was nothing fundamentally incorrect about your comment. And you apologized for it, what, twice?
Twice. And heartfelt. My intent, Brian, wasn't to hurt anybody. And if people were hurt by my comments, I want to understand their hurt. I want to fix it. I want to make sure that I have full understanding. I'm not a historian. It's not my background. And so, if they want to talk with me to help to correct the record, so to speak, I'm all ears. But what happened was what I would suggest is mob mentality. And of course, we're seeing it right across Canada. We're seeing it across the States and certainly Western Europe as well. where the anti-Israel sentiment has taken up in I'll say a lot of progressive circles, and it's vicious, and the attacks on me were vicious, and it resulted in my colleagues and the premier saying to me that they couldn't see a path forward other than my resignation as a cabinet minister.
And this is the part that bothers me, because I can understand the mob trying to do what they did. And you've been around politics a while, so have I. I've not been an elected official, but I observe you people. I watch what parties do to each other. I watch what movements do to each other. And a movement or a party will latch on to absolutely anything to try and gain advantage. For a party leader, especially someone in a position of premier, the way David Eby was, to fall for that mob mentality is extremely disappointing to me. You wrote your open letter about the hurt within the party, but can you talk to me for a minute about what it was like when you spoke to the premier, when you tried to make him understand, and he was trying to tell you that there's no way forward? Did you get the sense that he believed that you had done something wrong, or that he was just resigned to handing over the direction of the British Columbia New Democratic Party to an angry mob?
Well, in the early days, like right after the clip was had gone viral, I'd had conversations with the premier, with his staff. And it was like, okay, there was certainly, I'll say, angst and panic, almost panic, not quite panic, about like, okay, let's do an apology. This is what we're going to do. And I let them frame it, because I wanted to get it right. And I wanted things to settle down. We all did. This is not, I didn't sign up to defend, a conflict in the Middle East. I'm a provincial politician. I'm interested in healthcare. I'm interested in housing. I'm interested in affordability. I'm interested in building community and strengthening community. But this was not what I signed up for. And so was eager to just get like, what do these people need to hear from me so that they can understand that my intent was not to hurt anybody or insult anybody. And so we went through that. But it was really a couple of days later when there was still a call. There were about 6 imams that were threatening the New Democrats, saying that, there's an election, you won't be allowed to come into our mosques, which I thought was, again, very disappointing from leaders who are wanting peace. This is not how you move in that direction. And the premier basically, said, he talked with my colleagues at a caucus meeting. I wasn't there. And he just came back saying, Selina, I can't see a path forward without a resignation. Because I said, if you want my resignation, I won't fight you on it, but you have to ask me for it. And he just said, I can't see a path forward without that. And so I said, well, if that's what you're asking, and if that's what the caucus wants, then I guess I will have to provide you with my resignation. We had a little bit of a battle. Not really a battle. We had a little bit of a discussion around, because I said, then you need to announce that you've asked my resignation, and I gave it. And that wasn't sufficient for the premier or his office. And so we agreed that it would be a joint decision. But it was, the joint decision was, they said, you need to resign in order to settle this down. What was really hurtful, Brian, it was a clip in the days following when the premier, sort of carried on about deep work that I needed to do, which I thought was really disrespectful of me as a person. He knows me, and that he carried on in a very dramatic way, I think was disingenuous.
This is someone that you've sat in caucus with for years.
Yeah, we got elected at the same time, 2013.
And so a colleague of more than a decade stabbing you in the front.
Well,
he didn't stab you in the back. He stabbed you in the front.
Well, that's part of what broke my heart, right? When that's why, I hung around caucus for the next month, 2 weeks in Victoria, because we were back in session. I sat through listening to the anti-Israel crowd during throne speech at the front of the building, chanting River to the Sea. I met with two Jewish women who are lobbyists who were coming to throne speech, who talked about how fearful they were to come into the house of the people to get through the mob. One of them actually asked for an escort into the building from security. I was horrified having to listen to that all day from my office because I could hear it. And nobody said anything. Nobody said, Selina, are you okay? Nobody said, this is outrageous. They're literally calling for the destruction of the 11 million people who call Israel home. And nobody thought that would be hard.
I have to say that, having covered politics so long, it's not that I don't have a high opinion of people. I don't want to give that impression. People are very cynical about politicians. I think most people of all stripes go into politics for the right reason and are trying to do honorable work. But I'm trying to figure out how to describe how David Eby treated you that doesn't use words like dishonorable, cowardice, shameful.
When I wrote my letter to caucus 2 weeks after we'd been back in the House, because I thought, okay, let me see if I can find a path forward that allows me to do the things that are important to me. The reasons why I became a politician was to make things better for people.
Well, and as you said, you're a provincial politician.
Yeah.
David Eby's not there to find peace in the Middle East. None of you are at the provincial legislature. It's not a provincial issue.
Exactly. And so for me, it was like, okay, I still have a platform. I'm still a New Democrat. I still am an MLA. I want to be useful. I'm very well connected to the Jewish community here in British Columbia. I think I can engage enough of the Jewish community, and if I can find a way to engage enough of the Arab Muslim community here, can we find a way to have conversation, to break bread together, to listen to each other's pain, so that we can influence here in British Columbia the relationships between people? And really, it was when the Premier's Chief of Staff said, no, it's too political, that I knew that I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay because we'd lost our way to why we're here. We're here to make things better for the people here in British Columbia. And we're not doing that when we give in to these hordes who are demanding something that's thousands of miles away from this government, and when it's not our bailiwick. And
you had been asked and tasked by both David Eby and his predecessor, Premier John Horgan, to do outreach in these communities, correct?
Yeah, for sure. I'm very well saturated in the Jewish community. I've worked in the Jewish community, Jewish Family Services, and I know a lot of those folks. It's a small community here in British Columbia, about 40,000 Jews here, somewhat spread out, but there's certainly a core group that all of the organizations. I know all the rabbis, so really have good relationship and have been navigating challenging issues that have arisen over the years, over the 11 years that I've been elected, whether it's making sure that Premier Horgan knew what to say at a Kristallnacht ceremony, or that, lighting the Hanukkah menorah, making sure that we had representation, that people, understood the needs of the Jewish community. There certainly have been ongoing security issues over the years, completely heightened now. And in the early days of the fall, after the massacre, October 7th, connecting with the Premier, making sure he's, talking with the right people, hearing the story from the principal of our local Talmud Torah, and her, in that first week after October 7th, her wearing running shoes to school, and the teachers all doing that just in case they needed to run. And that impacted David as a human being. He retold that story. And so that was, the work that I had been tasked to do on behalf of government, is to make sure that the right people were in the room to get the ear of government. And so I had been doing that work since October 7th as well. And it was heightened, right? It was heightened. There was a mix-up on Holocaust Remembrance Day. I don't know if it made national news.
It did.
It did. Well, that was me working all weekend, reaching out to the Premier's office and saying, what the heck happened? And this is who you need to talk to. And this is how you need to present it. And, and helping them get the language right so that the community would say, okay, we understand the mix up. You're forgiven. Don't do it again. And that was enough. It was expected to be enough for the Jewish community. And there have been other instances among my caucus colleagues who have said things in ways that were hurtful to the Jewish community. And there's a pattern. There's been, I would say, 8 or 10 instances over a number of years. And each time, pretty much each time people asked forgiveness, and it was given, it was granted, or the expectation was an apology would be sufficient. Not all of my colleagues have apologized for the words that they have spoken, but many of them have. And
I'd forgotten that the Premier had put out that tweet, and I understand premiers rarely are writing their own Twitter post or X posts. But on Holocaust Remembrance Day, he said that, concerned, I forget the exact wording, we can find it online, I'm sure, made a comment about the rise of Islamophobia. And these were his words on Holocaust Remembrance Day. He was forgiven, and you were not.
Yes.
You wrote in a piece that was carried at National Post that your caucus colleagues broke your heart.
Yeah.
That it wasn't over this incident. What was it?
Well, it was coming for some time. I think certainly over the years, there had been comments made, anti-Israel comments made for sure. The minimization of anti-Semitism and the way it's playing out, that anti-Zionism is in many ways the new anti-Semitism. That's certainly, what we're seeing. But it was their silence, right? So, and it wasn't, I don't think it was intentional, but I just provided the example of me sitting in my office alone while people were chanting from the river to the sea right outside my office. There was no space for me to not hear that, because that's where I was doing my work. And nobody said anything to me. The fact that, I put out, people were sending me heart emojis, right? I believe my caucus colleagues, my ex-caucus colleagues, really liked me, cared for me. I don't doubt that. But when they would send me these heart emojis, because I knew that I was struggling, and I'd say, I don't need your heart emojis. I need you to stand up to anti-Semitism where you see it. And I got a response back from one of my colleagues that says, of course, we always do. And I thought, no, you don't. You have been absolutely silent on this. Silent on this. And that to me, so it's not like they're saying anti-Semitic things to anybody. And I don't believe they dislike Jews, but their silence is dangerous. It's dangerous. And that's the part that worries me. And that breaks my heart, because these people, I believe, are more courageous than that.
What would you like them to have said? Said something publicly, or said something to you?
Both. I think what I would have appreciated was them standing up for me and not asking for me to resign, because I think that would have been a statement. That would have been a statement that said, Selina's been an excellent colleague. She's been a good cabinet minister. We appreciate that people are upset. Her apology is sufficient. And no, we're not. We're going to have her back. We're going to have her back. But they didn't. They didn't.
We have to take a quick break now, but when we come back, I do want to ask you about the NDP used to be a party where, when I was younger, I remember Jewish leaders of new democratic parties across the country. And now it seems to be anti-Semitism is a real problem in the party. I want to explore that with you. More of that when we come back.
This episode is brought to you by ShipStation. If you run an e-commerce business, you know how much work it takes to produce something great while dealing with complicated shipping issues. That's why over 130,000 companies have turned to ShipStation, an innovative tool that allows you to focus less on shipping and more on building your brand. With ShipStation, you can manage orders, label printing, reporting, and customer service on one easy-to-use dashboard. You'll reduce warehouse costs with reliable enterprise solutions and save thousands on shipping costs with discounts up to 89% off. Plus, you can effortlessly import orders from everywhere you sell online. So, turn your shipping challenges into opportunities for growth. Go to ShipStation.com and use code POD to sign up for your free 60-day trial. That's ShipStation.com, code POD.
When I was a kid, I would not have expected the idea of anti-Semitism being rampant in the NDP, because the NDP was the party that had Jewish leaders. Now, I can't imagine there being a Jewish leader of an NDP, a New Democrat Party, whether it's federal or provincial. Selina, you think back, the federal party, at the time I was born, was David Lewis. Mm-hmm. His son, Stephen Lewis, ended up being a provincial leader. But you've got Dave Barrett out in British Columbia, leader of the British Columbia NDP. A strong connection between the Jewish community and the NDP. And overall, I would say, the progressive politicians, left-wing politicians, however you want to phrase it. And over the last several years, I've had to cover rampant anti-Semitism in the Ontario NDP, where I'm based, less so at the federal, thankfully. But I've talked to many members who have been activists within the party who have just said, I'm done, I'm leaving, my politics remains the same, but my party is different. Did you grow up in New Democrat? Were you always involved in progressive politics? Have things changed for you as a Jewish Canadian and a progressive?
So I think I've always been progressive, but I've never been partisan until about 2012. So really a latecomer in many ways to partisan politics. And I will say, I don't feel like I've left my party. I think my party left me. And certainly I've always believed that, I've been saying this for many years, that Jewish values are New Democrat values. I see similarities in terms of the values that I've taken on as a Jewish person, but I've also seen, growing anti-Semitism and within progressive circles. And I have connected with federal Jewish New Democrats across the country over the last number of years, trying to work within the party to address the anti-Semitism that we were seeing. But they've all abandoned it. It's just been too hard and too painful. And so it's at the point now where progressive Jews feel, like myself, a lot of us feel very homeless because it is our party of, I'll say a party of choice, because there's no perfect party, Brian. There's no perfect party. There's only a party of best fit. But it doesn't fit. And I think that for a lot of folks and a lot of New Democrats, they see Jews as oppressors. And I'm trying to understand what that means, right? Oppressor's bad in that way, but where they see Jews as white. And it's interesting. I was talking to my son not too long ago. We were talking about, the right-wing extremism says, Jews aren't white enough, and left-wing extremism says Jews are too white. And this is the identity politics challenge that I think we're faced with, and the extreme places that those positions are coming from. And it's all, and in some ways it feels like it's all, why is it always the Jews?
It's funny. The definition of white has changed over the years, and you're right. At one point, Italians weren't considered white, Greeks weren't, the Irish weren't considered white, and Jews definitely weren't white. And these were all groups that the extremists would go after and target. And now, because Israel is seen as being successful in this oppressor-oppressed mentality, Jews are therefore the oppressor. Mm-hmm. And it is an odd mentality that has taken over. And as far as Jews being white, these people really should go to Israel, and they should go to a synagogue in Canada and look around. It is a bizarre take, but you're right. It's something that it's almost as if being anti-Israel, and by extension anti-Semitic, because I do think they go hand in hand. You can absolutely criticize Israel, and I heard lots of people do that in Israel, criticizing the government, etc. But it seems like it is a shibboleth to be able to, wink, wink, that you're one of us if you're anti-Israel and against the Zionist oppressor.
Exactly, and really, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism have become, linked hand in hand. It's sort of the delegitimization of Israel is what is being asked for by, a lot of this left-wing, extremist position. And I keep saying, so why? I look at other conflicts that are happening in the world, Brian, and it's where are your voices as progressives? They're predicting that 30 million people are going to die in Sudan over the next few years because of a conflict there. And I have not seen a single progressive person bring that forward to the House of Commons about where is our government on that conflict. Or the Uyghurs, I just read in today's paper, the fact that slave labor is happening in China. And I don't see a BDS movement to stop doing business with China because they are using slave labor of Uyghurs, Muslim Uyghurs. And I don't see an uprising for those people who are being oppressed by governments. But somehow we are all obsessed with what's happening in Israel.
Well, I think people of good faith across the political spectrum are concerned about the issues that you raised. But you're right. There are not demands for a ceasefire now in Sudan. There are not demands for the BDS movement, the slave labor in China. The Prime Minister's top advisor for the longest time, and then ambassador to China, David Barton, ran a company that advised on, and held a company retreat right near where the Uyghur slave camps were. That gets passing mention in the media now and again. It does not result in outright protests and motions and denunciations and the streets being flooded.
This is what we call the double standard. This is a double standard. And trust me, I am so frustrated and angry with the Israeli government and the choices that the current government continues to make. I think it is a terrible government. I think Netanyahu belongs in jail. So I am eager to criticize their policies. But somehow Israel has to abide by a different standard than other governments. And that to me is, so what's that about? And I think that's what we get to be curious about. The other thing, Brian, that I think is important to note, and if you take a look at the federal party's New Democrat resolutions that they've had over the years at their conventions, if you take a look at the top resolutions that, because they all go in order, I have been blown away at the number of anti-Israel resolutions that will be in the top 30, something like 50, 60% of them. And nothing is mentioned about China, about Iran, about any other nation. But there's this obsession, this anti-Israel obsession. And I've called the chair of the resolution committee saying, what is going on? Yes, have one or two. but really, like 16 of your top 30 are about Israel. And the response is, it has been ever thus. And that's a quote. And I thought, you don't even care to question what is going on here? It's a problem.
That's really sad. When we look at what has happened on university campuses where a lot of this has spread, I think back to just over 20 years ago, covering the student union at Concordia University in Montreal. Mm-hmm. And they had gone full on intifada. In fact, they published a student handbook called the Intifada. They would march into their student union meetings with a snare drum and a Palestinian flag leading them in. That school was the outlier at the time, though, with how radical it was on this issue. And you wouldn't have seen that in the same way at University of Toronto, at UBC, at UVic, at University of Calgary. That radicalism, though, has definitely spread across the country. Our institutes of higher education have been used by people with an agenda to spread these this hatred.
Yeah. And I was the Minister for Post-Secondary Education, so I was in the thick of it. And working across the nation. I want to give props to Stephen Lecce, who is the chair of the Ministers of Education right across the nation. And he and I were working collaboratively and inviting other ministers of post-secondary education across the nation to come up with some strategies to how to support presidents to do the right thing. And some were doing better than others. I think it's a significant challenge. But yet again, I have to say, Brian, this is, if I can just bring it back to British Columbia again and the lack of response from government, when a prominent physician, Dr. Ted Rosenberg, made a very public leaving UBC Medical School and saying it's a toxic work environment. There's 288 Jewish physicians signed the letter, basically saying we can't train these UBC medical students who are coming and bringing their hate to the healthcare system. We heard nothing from government. There was no response. There was no response to, what are we going to do? We have to train more doctors. I was tasked with opening up another medical school here in British Columbia. And if we didn't have doctors to take on these residents, what were we going to do?
Do you believe that your push when you were Minister of Education to have mandatory Holocaust education in the school system was part of why you were targeted?
I think it's more than that, actually. I think it's probably beyond that. I mean, I want to give props to my colleague, Rob Fleming, who was Minister of Education in 2017. He started that work and COVID took it off the table for a bit. And I was the one who went back and did pick it up. I was Minister of Post-Secondary Education, so really had to talk to the Minister of Education, and really did it through the Premier's office. It's the right move. But that night that we announced it, I believe it was October 30th, I was interviewed by a local TV station here, and I was asked to comment on a Langara instructor who had made outrageous comments right after the October 7th massacre.
I recall those comments. They were horrendous.
They are horrendous and despicable. And I reiterated that night. And of course it was broadcast. And there is some suspicion, some who've been doing a little bit of research have noted that, in fact, that's when the protests accelerated against me. Personally, I was starting to be named, and a petition was starting to circulate to get me removed from cabinet. So my hunch and the hunch of others is that there was a target on my back at that night that started, and it culminated, and the opportunity arose at the B'nai B'rith panel that I was on, and that was the opportunity to take, full frontal action to do a push to have me removed. And unfortunately, my colleagues and the Premier fell for it.
For people that don't recall, the Langara College instructor who made the comments described the October 7th attacks as an amazing, brilliant offensive just after the attacks, when not just so close to the attacks that we didn't know what had happened. Hamas had clearly broadcast their own atrocities. We all knew what had happened, but Natalie Knight still called this an amazing, brilliant offensive. She was let go by Langara College after that, which I'm a big supporter of free speech, but there's also organizations have to practice good political hygiene. I always use the term political hygiene, meaning removing yourself from people or organizations that will leave you with a bad smell. Did Premier Eby fall for a mob that is linked up with people like Natalie Knight, the radicals? I mean, is he tying the NDP's wagon to a group of people that are so radical that the average British Columbian who would vote NDP or United BC, I forget what they changed.
BC United.
Who, look, you win elections on swing voters. I don't think the average swing voter is going to look at what this woman said and look at the mob that she's with and say, yeah, that's who I want to be with, and I want them to have influence with my government.
Well, I'm going to leave that up to the voters to decide. But what I can tell you, Brian, is that I live in a suburban community. I represent a suburban community, and in the 6 weeks that since I have been, asked to provide a resignation, and then did a very public leaving of the party that frankly left me. My community has wrapped its arms around me. They are supportive of me. They are proud of me. They appreciate the work that I've done. They appreciate the sacrifices I've made to represent them. They have felt very well represented. And that, to me, those are the people that matter most to me, frankly, the people that I represent. And it will be up to them to decide where they want to hitch their wagon to in October.
Do you plan to run as an independent in October?
No, I although people have been urging me to, which is very, very sweet and thoughtful, but I'd already decided to not run. So it was 50-50 in the summer, and I had let the premier know back in December that I wasn't going to run again. He expressed surprise at that. I've given 16 years to public service, and I think it's time to do something else.
Well, best of luck in future endeavors. Politics is a tough business on anyone, and you've definitely experienced the worst parts of it over the past few months. So thanks for the time today, Selina, and all the best in the future.
Thank you. It was really great to chat with you.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name is Brian Lilley, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. You can subscribe to Full Comment wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, the new YouTube podcast. Listen through your app or Alexa-enabled devices and help us out. Give us a rating, leave a review, tell your friends about us, share us on social media where you still can. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilley.